Squirrel.
Squirrel. Squirrel. All right. Chris Salvo, come up onto the stage, Chris. So Chris is with Electrified Garage. So why don't we start out just with a little bit of the backstory. Who are you? Where are you from?
Sure.
And how the heck did EG come to exist?
Okay. So as you so graciously introduced me, my name is Chris Salvo. I'm CEO of Electrified Garage. I started as a BMW technician, as many Tesla technicians did. I then got a job with Tesla not shortly thereafter from when you started. So I was with Tesla in Boston, Massachusetts, in January of 2013, and I was there until about the end of 2017. I sent Elon an email and told him how stressed out we were and how much we needed more resources. And unfortunately, middle management doesn't really appreciate it when you undermine them, even though that's what Tesla says to do directly. If your immediate superior doesn't help you, go to the next person. Well, I went all the way to the top. I talked to Elon's office secretary at length about the things we needed, and the biggest problem we had is very dissimilar to Florida. We only had one service center for all of New England. So we were in charge of close to 15,000 cars, and we had 6 guys to service 15,000 cars. So 6 days a week, 100 hours a week, just didn't really cut it, and I was kind of tired of being a zombie all the time. So anyways, some changes did happen. Things did get better. Unfortunately, I got let go for performance reasons 6 months later, conveniently. For those of you that spend time on YouTube, my business partner is Rich Rebuilds. If any of you follow his channel, his claim to fame was he took a car that was in Hurricane Sandy, literally had a dead fish in it when he got it. That's how flooded it was. Realized very quickly he couldn't fix this on his own. So he went and picked up another car that had been in an accident and swapped all the electronics over. I was that jerk at Tesla that wouldn't sell him parts when he came in to try to buy a 12-volt battery because his car was salvaged. Thankfully, he doesn't hold a grudge. So after I left Tesla, I bumped back into him. And so he was, only had 30,000 followers at that point and was trying to find a way to make more content now that the car was together and running. I had started a company called EV Tuning that was doing parts and accessories. We were like the first people to make replacement parts for door handles. I'm sure everybody here that has a Model S has had at least one door handle break. We make a kit that fixes that. So between the two of us, I had content, he had exposure. We worked together. For the next 18 months or so, we were doing nights and weekends installs of all the different things we were selling, making content on his channel. And at that point, people were asking Rich from all over the country, hey, I want third row seats in the back of my Model S, and Tesla won't do this for me. Is this something you'll do? And reality is, Rich is an IT director and has no business fixing a car at all. And it's a miracle he hasn't died trying to take battery packs apart on his own. So he's literally a cat that's out of lives at this point. So he said, I've changed a battery in flip-flops for the last time, but I think you have a better chance of not dying. And I have another business partner, Chad, that was also part of the mobile team for Tesla up in Boston. So 3 of us got together, sat down one night, tried to think of what a name for the business would be. It's kind of ironic. The reason why we picked Electrified Garage instead of Electric Garage was Electric Garage's URL was $25,000 and Electrified Garage was only $12.99. So we're like, great, this is for us. So everybody now like remarks about how great the name is and how it doesn't, pigeonhole us into only doing one thing. We're not just like the Tesla alternative or something like that. We do everything. We do little kids' Power Wheels and put cordless drills in them to make them go faster. We had one kid that was kind of on the spectrum for autism and had an electric dirt bike. The dirt bike couldn't keep up with him. So we hot rodded it, put a bigger motor in it, bigger batteries. Now he's going to bed and the bike is still sitting there going, well, who's the next person that's going to ride me? So it's rewarding to do that kind of stuff. But from there, obviously we're a Tesla alternative. We do things exactly the same way Tesla would do them. But then we also do the stuff that Tesla doesn't want to do as far as aftermarket things are concerned. So in New Hampshire, New England, Canada, winter wheels and tires is a big thing. Tesla would not at that time install aftermarket wheels and tires. Now I think they'll make you sign a waiver that says, I know these aren't original, and do it for you. But simple things like that were kind of silly. and that was like an opportunity for us to, still help you out with things that you need to do without going to somebody that potentially might do something that harms the vehicle or compromises your warranty or something of that nature. So
And now you're in Florida.
yeah, so now I'm here in Ocala. I'm here in West Palm Beach. If you noticed outside, we're also partnering with EV Garage, who's hanging out in the back there, Arturo and Gerardo and Jose. So those guys are down in Palmetto and in Doral. So we're going to be licensing our brand to them, and they're going to be an extension of Electrified Garage for South Florida. And then we're going to be looking at doing that around the country over the next 2 years.
Cool. Good stuff. So back in the day when Rich was using a kitchen knife
Yes.
to take his car apart, as you said, you were the person who was kind of denying him spare parts and things. Right. Since then, and I'm not an expert in this by any means, Tesla has opened up, I think partly because of the New England right to repair laws have opened up the service manual and various other things. Has that been a big change to your business?
So yeah, so we're basically set up as what a certified body shop would be. So we're able to purchase parts from Tesla. We're not allowed to buy everything. Most of the high voltage stuff is restricted, mostly for safety reasons. In the United States, it's very unique. There is no certification outside of what Tesla would give you if you worked there. The government wants to wait for 6 people to die before they write any kind of legislature that says, this is what you need to do in order to touch high voltage stuff. Whereas if you go to Europe, it's a 40-hour training course you have to do before they'll allow you to touch high voltage, any kind of high voltage component. So yeah, so it's helped a lot to have access to the repair manuals, which you all have as well. I think they're doing it for free right now. But then you also can get access to Toolbox yourself, and if you're somewhat handy and understand computers, you can figure out some of the basic stuff on how to reprogram your own car or to install a module, that kind of stuff. For the more complex things, like the orange car outside started as a 2-wheel drive car. We put the front motor in it, replaced the battery with a dual motor battery, and then reprogrammed the whole car, so now it's a performance car. Stuff like that's probably above most people's ability, but for average stuff, like if your charge port was to break, you could change your own charge port now and reflash the car, and it would work. So it's come a long way.
So we'll talk about some of the car conversion projects in a little bit, but I want to open up the floor to any questions. So is anything off limits that we can't ask you, or pretty much if anybody's got a question about?
We're all friends here. It's fair game.
Okay. So has anybody got any questions about Tesla parts, repair, service, what breaks, what doesn't break, those types of things?
Got a Model Y Performance and an X Plaid I just took delivery of 6 weeks ago. I'm unclear on rebooting. Can you talk a little bit about rebooting and how, whether it's important, not important, or, I mean, my Model Y screen has gone blank on me a few times, and that's a little disconcerting to say the least, as you're doing about 90 miles an hour coming down 95. But
there's some different methodology as far as, like, do you press both scroll wheels? Do you step on the brake at the same time? Like, what do you need to do as far as that's concerned? My experience is that the brake pedal doesn't actually do anything other than ensure that you're not going to accidentally have the car in drive or do something stupid while the car is rebooting. So it's really just a scroll wheel reset. The other real reset would be the fact that you have to disconnect the 12-volt battery. For a 3 and a Y, there's another connector underneath the rear seat on the right rear passenger seat. That also has to be disconnected. That shuts the whole car down. You plug that back in and reconnect the 12-volt battery. That brings the car right back up again. That's the only real hard reset that there is. Like I said, stepping on the brake pedal doesn't do anything. As far as the screen going black and that being disconcerting while you're driving down the road, I would agree. But by the same token, there are 2 separate systems at work there. So the MCU and the screen and everything as far as like your navigation radios, that stuff, that's a completely separate system from everything that has to do with the car driving. So even though the screen could be off, the rest of that stuff is still operating in the background, and you're not physically resetting that stuff at that time. So you shouldn't be overly concerned if it does happen. Obviously, if it never turns back on again, that's a bigger problem. but otherwise, it's not a huge cause for concern, and it's a computer on wheels. They need to be rebooted every so often, the same way your computer at home. You shouldn't leave it on all the time. So usually when cars come in for an annual service, we'll do that hard reset, and bring the car back up, and usually that alleviates 95% of the problems.
Yeah.
So the question is, do you need to reboot your car after a software update? Typically, the car is going through and doing its own rebooting anyways, so you usually shouldn't have to do that. The only time I'd say maybe would be if you get an alert that the firmware failed and needs to start over again, then that would be the time to reboot it.
Hey, so 12-volt batteries, I have an X, and
Okay.
I also have a Model Y. So is there a best practices or a better way? Because we're on our third battery in the X.
Okay.
Is there really going to be a lithium replacement or something that we could leverage versus the lead acid that's currently in there?
So another gentleman actually just approached me about this outside, Olaf. And so the concern I would have is that those batteries run at a higher voltage than the regular lead acid ones do. So it's not just as simple as swapping the battery. There's charging logic that has to be adjusted as well. So I don't know how they would necessarily make that backwards compatible for all of them. There are a couple of aftermarket solutions where they have their own battery management on board rather than rely on the car to do that. So the battery itself says, okay, this is what I want. This is all I'm going to allow to go in here. If you try to do more or less, I'm going to shut myself off and protect myself. So the bigger issue is more how Tesla charges their batteries as to why they fail more frequently. And I think that because the lithiums are a little bit more resilient and also they've only been out there for a year and a half or so now, we may very well see that they're going to have issues too, just for different reasons. But the lead acid batteries, because they're being overcharged constantly, they literally get pregnant and like the battery case itself starts to swell because they're getting essentially cooked alive. And down here in Florida, heat's not your friend either. So really, it ends up being like anywhere from 18 to 24 months, maybe a little bit longer, is basically all they last. And then at that point, they need to be replaced. So,
Over here.
Hi.
hello. Oh, did you push the power button accidentally? It's in a really inconvenient spot for holding the microphone.
Can I have a 2021 Model 3 standard rear wheel drive, and I understand my battery is different than all the other models, and I'm never sure when I just go around town whether I should keep it at an average charge. Should I keep it at 60% if I'm only going to use like 20 or 30% that day?
Mm-hmm.
Or one of the technicians at Tampa Service said I can charge the standard rear wheel drive battery to 100%, no
Right.
problem. Can you tell me what's different about it, and can it be replaced ever with a more longer range battery, or is that impossible?
Okay. So the reason why is the chemistry of the battery and the physical materials making it up are different. So the standard range batteries, it's fine to charge them to 100%. They actually suggest that that's the best way to treat it. The other cars are using lithium ion instead, and those ones don't like to be charged or left at 100% for long periods of time. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm like the opposite of everybody else, and I've never had a problem. And usually the people I tell to do it how I do it don't have any issues either. So the general rule of thumb is probably what, 20%? No more than discharge more than 20%. Don't charge it more than 80%. Leave it in that sweet spot, and everything will be great. Well, that is until you go on a long trip for the first time. You go to charge back up, and let's say you're supposed to have 350 miles of range. The car may only show that you're going to have 330 miles of range. So the reason for that is the car has to know where the top and the bottom of the battery are. If you're constantly staying in Goldilocks land, it's never going to know what's the top and what's the bottom. So that doesn't mean that you're not necessarily going to get the range out of the battery that it's supposed to have, but visually on the screen, it's not going to show that that's the case. So cycling the battery through, charging it to 100%, and then discharging it below 10% on a 220 outlet is the best way to teach it what that is. And you could do that like 3 or 4 times before you get ready to go on a trip. But for myself, I charge to 100% every single day because I know I'm going to go out and drive my car every single day. And whether it's I got to go to work or I may have to go rescue somebody on the side of the road or whatever it may be, I want to make sure that I have that range there. So my Model 3 has 88,000 miles on it. Originally, it got 310 miles on a charge. I still get 290 at max capacity. So to lose 20 miles of range over that period of time, it's really not that bad. So, I'm kind of jaded about everybody that is told, don't charge past this, don't discharge past that. And in reality, I just get in the car and drive it like a regular car, and I never have any problems. But it always seems to be the people that are super, particular about keeping it in that spot. Those are the ones that are first to squawk and have problems. So, and as far as changing the battery goes, we could put a long range battery into your car. It's a 1-for-1 swap. We would just have to reprogram the car and let it know that you have a bigger battery. That's all. Yes.
Hey, Chris. So regarding the plats
Yes.
for us enthusiasts of high performance cars in a safe environment, obviously. Tesla keeps advertising that the plats are the top speed is 200 miles, which is not, because the car is limited to 160 something and 170 something in track mode, which I find it's disappointing because you're advertising something that is not real.
Right.
So what's the real reason why the car is limited? You hear the brakes, the liability, the whatever, the motors. So what could be the real reason why the car is limited to that speed? Because we know the car is capable of much more speed.
So my understanding was that it was a combination of, yes, the brakes are not necessarily safe to try to come down from speed at that speed, and I've got a number of customers with that issue. The other thing is, I think the tires are not necessarily rated for that speed as well. So if you go for a continuous period of time, you could have a blowout with one of the tires. But one of the companies that we do some business with, you probably have seen it. They're up in Canada, and they got the car to do like 215 or 217. So I mean, the car is physically able to do it. But from a manufacturer standpoint, I think liability does come into play as a big part of it. And you'll notice that there's a lot of other supercars out there that are limited as well, that don't go more than like 175 or 185.
I remember when they brought out the Bugatti Veyron and they did the first high-speed runs on that. If you did a single 250-mile-an-hour run, you had to spend $25,000 on a new set of tires.
Yeah.
I have a 22 Model X long range. There's a vibration coming from the front through the steering or the yoke, and on acceleration, it increases that vibration.
Okay.
And we have two of them that do exactly the same thing. Took it to this service center in Charlotte, North Carolina, and they said, well, it's a known issue, but we don't have a fix for it. The engineers are researching it, and so I looked on YouTube, and there was a guy with an X, 2019 X, and he did a nice little video where he's on his way to Charlotte or the service center, and they replaced the two front, I think half drive shafts.
Yeah, the half shafts. Yep.
Yeah, and that fixed it. He also quoted an actual repair document, and I provided that to Charlotte, and they said, "Oh no, that doesn't apply. It's from way back."
What year did you say yours was again?
Got it in July this year, 22.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So all the way back to 2016, Model X has been having this problem. So 2016 to 2019, like August, they had the same front drive unit as Model S, and then they changed and became what's called Raven, which basically means it's a Model 3 rear drive unit. They've moved it up front to the car, and now your car is a completely different setup altogether. Unfortunately, whoever designs the motor mounts is the same guy that designed the motor mounts in 2016. And so the issue is everything is allowed to move and flex around in such a way under hard acceleration that it beats up on the angle of the axles. And the axles were the wrong length originally. I believe they've corrected that part. But we're actually working on basically stiffer motor mounts so that everything isn't allowed to shuttle around. And that's essentially what you're feeling is that initially it's just the motor moving. Eventually it starts to beat up on the axles, and then you're going to feel it all the time. And so one of the reasons they said to ride around in low all the time was so that kind of helps with the geometry of the axles and puts less strain on the motor itself. But the reality is that they still haven't fixed that problem. So brand new car today has the same problem as it did in 2016. Some components have changed over time, but the overall design of how those mounts are made is the same. It's just really soft rubber, and it's kind of for ironically, it's created for noise and vibration reasons, so you don't get that stuff, and instead it's causing it instead of alleviating the issue.
A 12-volt battery and auxiliary connection.
Yes.
I'm on a road trip from San Diego, and I bought one of those little refrigerators you plug in the cigarette lighter.
Okay.
and I'm having to use camp mode in order to keep it running when I'm not driving it.
Right.
What are your thoughts and concerns about using the 12-volt battery and the DC to DC converter, et cetera, and taking advantage of that? Is there a problem with that? Is there any issues?
So it really depends on how much extra power that refrigerator is drawing, but for the most part, it should be fine. The car is smarter than you or I, so if there is an issue, it'll shut itself off or deny 12-volt power going to it if there is an issue. So Model 3 is different, Model Y is different. Actually, all the new cars are different. They don't have fuses anymore. They have resettable circuit breakers, basically. So the moment it senses something wrong, it shuts it off, and it will not allow it to come back on until the car has gone to sleep and wakes back up again. And if the fault still occurs, it'll just stay shut off the whole time.
What about using it for things like this, the normal inverter where you want to plug in a 110 device?
So for things like that, it gets a little more tricky as to where and how you wire it in so that it doesn't make the system mad. And then obviously there's a limitation as to how much output it's putting out on the DC-DC side. So you can't put like a 3,000 watt inverter and hope that it's going to work. You know, usually 800 to 1,000 watts is the most you're going to get.
Hi, thanks for being here.
Sure.
Model 3, is there any difference between the two-finger reboot and the two-finger reboot with the brake?
No. So yeah, so we covered this in the beginning. There is no difference. The only difference is really just so that it ensures you don't do something stupid while the car is rebooting, like put it in drive or reverse and try to back up and you don't have your backup camera on. The only real additional reboot would be you'd physically disconnect the 12-volt battery, and then if it's an S or an X, there's a fireman's loop that you have to disconnect. If it's a 3 or a Y, there's a connector under the seat. Once you reconnect that stuff, that's like a real hard reboot, like similar to setting a circuit breaker off in your house.
And there's a power off button in one of the menus.
Yeah, so that will shut it down for just a period of time, but it'll usually wake right back up again. So.
Right, and that's not a...
No, that won't do anything different, no.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so you've talked about the resets. You also mentioned it's a computer on wheels.
Right.
Would you recommend two thumb wheel reset once a day?
I think that might be a little excessive. I usually wait for it to have a problem or start to act in a certain way and then do it, but there's no harm in doing that, and that might be a bit much, but maybe on a bi-weekly or monthly basis you could do that. I don't think you need to do it more frequently than that. Unless, you know, for instance, I was having an issue where my radio went completely dead and I didn't know why. It ended up being that my thumb drive that I was using for Sentry mode was corrupted and all of my radio wouldn't work. So Bluetooth wouldn't work, regular radio, streaming, nothing. I got no sound except for turn signals out of my car. And I couldn't figure out why. Well, I reset it a few times and that didn't make a difference. Found out I pulled the thumb drive out and let the car go to sleep. Magically, everything worked again.
Thanks.
So.
We have time for one more or maybe two more questions, depending on what it is. Yep.
Quickie question relative to the 12-volt outlet.
Yes.
The fuse, mine quit working.
Okay.
What's the deal on fuses? You don't cover it in the manual, you don't cover it in the service manual. Where are the box, and how do you get the layout? What car have you got? Model S.
What year?
2018.
Okay. So his question is, he has a 2018 Model S and what we used to call the cigarette lighter, the 12-volt power outlet that's in the center console. It's dead. It doesn't work anymore, and there's nothing in the service or nothing in the owner's manual that tells you where the fuses are like a regular car. You're also going to have an unfortunate surprise that they're not the same fuses as you would normally use. You have to go buy special ones for them to fit. They're these little tiny ones. So on your particular vehicle, there's a set of fuses in the center console. There's also some under the hood as well. After we leave here, if you want to come over, we'll take a look on the computer and I can show you exactly where it is. Easy enough.
Last question.
Have you had experience prepping Teslas to go to Europe? Myself and my brother-in-law both looked into it and ended up deciding it wasn't feasible or worth doing.
So this is the secret sauce stuff that Elon doesn't want you to tell anybody about. If it's an MCU1 car, then basically what we need to do is jailbreak the car, and then we have administrative access over the vehicle. At that point, we can tell it that, you know, obviously we would need to get the parts from Europe, the different charge port, the 3-phase charger and that stuff. Is once we have those components, it gets more tricky because there's also a bunch of wiring harnesses that have to be done at the same time. it's physically possible, but I don't know, like, unless you're hell bent on doing it, it may not make sense from a cost standpoint. It could probably be in the neighborhood of $4,000 to $5,000 when all is said and done, just because of how much of the car is going to have to get rewired to do that. But it is doable, and we can do configuration changes in that way. Much like we took a 2017 75D, and we took the battery pack and the rear motor out of a 100D and made it into a P100D. We just reprogrammed the car afterwards. So, or if you wanted to add a second onboard charger, we can do things like that as well. But the European thing, we get that question fairly frequently, and nobody seems to just want to justify the cost to do it. So,
cool. Alrighty. In the last 1 minute, I've got a quick question for you, and then we'll wrap it up and hand it over to the next person. So, super impressed. We haven't managed to stump Chris yet. He's going to be here all day, right outside this door. So, if you've got any other questions, then hit him and Byron up. If they haven't seen it, I'll be amazed. You've seen pretty much everything. So the last thing. So outside, you've got an electric mini moke.
Yes.
And you've got half of a
Land Rover. Yep.
Half of a Land Rover.
Yep.
So that's another part of the business that you put Tesla bits in other cars.
Exactly. So yeah. So we also do gasoline to electric conversions as well. So the Land Rover is a '61 Land Rover Series 2. We took the gasoline engine out of it. We put an electric motor from Netgain. Similar, if you're familiar with EV West, it's a similar drive unit to what they put in their air-cooled Porsches. We kept the rest of the driveline original because that was a customer's request to not modify the vehicle in any way. So if they want to put it back to stock, they can. And then we're going to be using 7 modules from a Tesla battery pack, and those will be going into there. So it'll have about 35, 36 kilowatts. It'll go about 100, 120 miles on a charge. It'll make twice as much power as it did originally. So it'll be a fun car to go back and forth to the beach. That gentleman lives in Miami, so it's just to go to and from his condo. But then as far as the Moke is concerned, Mokes come with these big, heavy lead acid batteries. They don't go very fast, kind of intentionally. So instead, we take all the lead acid batteries out. We take about 500 pounds of weight out of the vehicle. So the vehicle starts life at 950 pounds, and we take 500 out. We only put about 150 back in. We use 3 Tesla modules, and then we up the invert. No, I'm sorry, not the inverter. The motor controller gets bumped up in voltage as well. It now does 40 miles an hour, so you can drive it on a regular street because it is street legal, and it's not so terrifying that you're going to get run over by some kid in a Honda Civic. But yeah, so we do EV conversions. We actually just finished doing 2 for Robert Downey Jr. that you'll get to see on Discovery Channel next year. We did a 65 Corvette for him, and we did a 72 Chevy pickup truck. So,
and I know we're 1 minute over, but do you just want to mention the original Roadster?
Oh, right, yeah. So the other thing, as you were talking about before, they had the one from Iron Man that was in the show there. So we have the car before that. We have the yellow Roadster Mule 1 up at our shop right now. I magically found an AC propulsion drive unit and the power electronics module. So we're going to be in the process of restoring that right now. And that will be, thank you. that will be at the Peterson Museum starting in the middle of November, and that'll probably be there till mid next year. And then we're working with all of the original engineering team to hopefully film a series of like physically putting it back together to the point that it drives. Right now, we're just making it look the part. Next year, we'll be putting real batteries back into it and getting everything hooked up and livened up so that it'll be, you know, what it was originally. What is it, 15 years ago now? Yeah. So that'd be pretty cool.
Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Salvo.
Thank you.